Hi and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you some dry aging bags, and I've got some meat that I'm going to dry age. Now these are wonderful bags. We use them all the time for dry aging cuts of meat, sirloin, rib of beef, etc. And they make a wonderful job of it if you do not have an air drying cabinet. Now I know that a lot of people out there don't want to spend huge amounts of money on air drying cabinets. And there's lots of information on the internet about how to make an air drying cabinet. Some are great, some aren't so great, but they all involve quite a lot of cost. Now, the bags that I'm using are, they're from a company in Denmark. They are branded as either smoke dust dry aging bags, or you may have seen them as Umai bags. Those are both brands, and the bags themselves are actually tubulin bags, and they're made by a company in Denmark, and they are very specialist. They look like an ordinary plastic bag, but they are actually a membrane that allows water vapour to pass through it to atmosphere. So if you put something in there which has a higher humidity than what's on the outside, then the vapour will pass through that membrane and thus leave whatever's in the bag slightly drier. And that's the whole purpose of them. They're a very useful piece of kit if you like air drying meat or making charcuterie. So they work for salamis as well, so you can air dry salamis in them. Literally, they take away the need to have one of these very expensive air drying cabinets. So let me show you the bag. We sell these in various sizes. This is a 250mm by 350mm bag. We also sell them slightly narrower, 200 by 400, and we also do them slightly bigger, 300 by 600 mil, depending on what you're going to be putting in them. And you can see, looking at this bag, it is an ordinary, what looks like an ordinary plastic bag. Nothing ostensibly special looking about it. The difference is what it's actually made of. It's a special polymer which allows water vapour to pass through it. I think that the best way of describing this, it's like the food equivalent of Gore-Tex. So if you ever have any outdoor clothing that allows water vapour to pass through and breathe, this is the food equivalent of that, if you like. So let me show you how we're gonna use this. So basically, what we'll do is we're going to put the meat in this bag, and then we're going to put it through the vacuum machine. And what we do when we get the meat in the bag, we have to, because this vacuum machine is designed for the ribbed style vacuum bags. Now this doesn't have any ribs in it, as you can see. So when this will suck the air out of this bag, once it's clamped down, that will essentially just close in, and it won't take any of the air out of the bag. So in order to achieve that, there are two kind of steps that we need to take. The first is that we scrunch up the opening to the bag, so we kind of give it some texture. And then the second is that we actually insert this little piece of plastic, which just assists the air to be drawn out of the bag into the vacuum machine. If you have a standard chamber vacuum machine, you don't need these. Okay, so this goes in. It has to straddle the heat bar and also the vacuum drawing area here, which is bounded by this black neoprene. So the bag sits in there like so. You don't want to obstruct this hole here, because that is where the air gets sucked out. So you can see this is sticking out the bag slightly, crossing the membrane. And then what we do, I'm not going to do it now because we'll obviously put the meat in first. I'll close this up. We'll draw a vacuum seal it. We'll check that once the seal stops, that no air is coming back in. If we need to reseal it, we'll leave everything as it is, and we'll go through a sealing process once again, just to make sure The only reason we draw a vacuum in these or on these bags is so that we get a very good contact between the meat and the bag. Now, after about 24 hours, you'll find that the vacuum is gone. Okay, so and what will happen is that the bag will form almost like a contact with the meat, and that's great. Once you've got that contact between the bag and the meat, you shouldn't have too many issues. So let me get this meat out here. What we're going to do is we'll just pop this straight into the bag. This is a nice rib of beef. And you can see we got this from the supermarket. That's actually quite wet, and that's not something that we want to cook straight away. We want to dry age this for a little bit. I'll just get some tissue. We want to dry age it, give it an intensification of the flavour. Also, some of the enzymes in the meat will actually start to break down. So you can see the first thing I'm doing is I'm literally rolling this bag back on itself so that I can sit the meat inside. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll the bag up around the meat. And the reason I'm doing this is so that I don't get any meat juices on that seal. I want to keep that seal as clean as possible. That's really important. And you can see there, that meat is nicely in the bag. I'll just now dry my hands, get rid of any fat or moisture on my hands. And now we're ready to draw that vacuum. So you can see that sits quite neatly in the bag. The other thing is, if you get larger bags but you've got smaller cuts of meat, you can actually cut and reseal the bags, so you don't have to, you know, if you have a big bag and small meat, don't waste any of that space in the in the bag. So make sure that you get best bang for your buck, I think is the phrase that I like to use. Right, so we're just popping that in there like so. We're going to get our vac assist strip and we're going to pop that in the bag so that it crosses the heat bar and is inside the neoprene vacuum seal. So we're going to close this down now, and we're going to draw a vacuum. Now, before I do this, we have to watch what's happening on this bag and we have to react. So if it's not drawing vacuum out, we need to cancel it just in case it goes onto a seal program, okay? So we need to be mindful of that. So let's just seal the bag. Right, we can see the air is beginning to come out. We can assist that by pushing the air out. And we can see that's now drawing a really nice vacuum. There we go. And then I'm going to seal that. I can see it's just pulling a little bit of blood out of that meat, but that's okay. Right, so there we go. We've got a seal. Now, I just want to check to make sure that that's okay. I think it is okay, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to just go vacuum, cancel, seal in one go, all right? And I'm just going to pop another seal cycle on it so that I'm double sealing it. Now, I need to be careful here because I don't want to melt the bag. So I'm going to leave it in here for a couple of seconds to let everything just cool down. Okay. So it's very easy sometimes, you know, people can damage these bags if they don't deal with this particular phase of the operation carefully. So we just let that cool down a little bit. I'm going to open my machine up and you can see here that has actually melted through. So we need to be a little bit careful there. So I'm just going to move that in a fraction and I'm going to put another seal on it. Now, that's melted it on both sides, but I actually think that that's sealed because I can't see air coming back in. So I'm just going to run that again and position that in so that I can get another seal on it. Right, and I'm going to cancel that early. There we go. I'm just going to leave it in there. So I've given that a couple of seconds seal this time. And we'll see how that's done. So there we go. That's actually given us another seal. Yeah, we can see another bit of sealing going on there. So there you go. So if you leave it in the heat cycle for too long, it can actually melt the bag. So you need to be quite careful about this. This is okay because it's melted it closed. There is a seal there. I think that might actually be in need of another seal, but that's all good. We'll just try and move the bag out as best we can so I can get as much of it into the vacuum machine as possible. I'll just pop that across that seal again. And I'm going to go and seal again. I'm going to count to 3, 2, 3. Stop that. I'm going to leave this in here to cool down. So I've been using these bags for many, many years now, probably around about 6, 7 years. And you can see, even when I'm doing it, things can go a little bit sideways. So you do need to be careful with these bags. We'll just open that up and you can see there with one seal, that's gone right the way across there. Right the way across there. And I will say this, every vacuum machine is slightly different, okay? They all have slightly different characteristics. Some have very hot heat bars, some have very weak heat bars. So you need to be mindful of that when you're doing this. So if you want to practice with a little offcut of the bag, then that's absolutely fine. But once you get a seal, to make this work properly in the fridge, what you do is you plop it onto a rack. That'll go straight in the fridge and air dry. There's one thing we need to do with this beforehand, and that is weigh it, okay? So I'm just going to zero my scales, and I'll get a pen. So we're going to plop this on the scales because I don't want it to dry out too much. So 1767. So 1767, and today is the 14th of the 10th, and I'll put grams there. Okay, now I'm going to look for around about 15%, 10 to 15% weight drop on this. A lot of that's going to be moisture, so that's going to sit in the fridge, air drying. I'll weigh it occasionally. I would say once every couple of days is probably a good start position. You want to see how it's losing weight. You can work out your target weight if you want to. So if you want it to go down 15%, you can calculate that and actually put that on the bag, write target weight, and then weigh it every couple of days. When you see that weight, take it out. We'll revisit this when it's at its target weight. I'm going to go for 15% weight loss, and we'll see the difference. So if you get a really good close shot of this meat, you'll see that it's got quite a pale colour. We're going to be looking for a much darker colour once this has had the chance to dry out a little bit. And you know, those enzymes within the meat itself aren't going to stop working just because it's in a vacuum bag. They're going to carry on working. The fat's going to yellow up a little bit. It's going to look really nice. And when it's taking all the moisture out of this meat, it's also intensifying the flavours. And we'll come back to this and cook this up when this is ready. And we'll enjoy the most amazing 2 rib of beef. If you want to do this with a whole sirloin, do dry age it whole and then cut it into steaks. That works fine. And then what you can do is you can individually vacuum pack each one of those steaks, stick it in the freezer, and then they're ready for when you need them. But this is a fantastic way of adding value to meat. If you're, if you're in the restaurant industry, and we do sell these into the restaurant industry, these bags quite a lot. You can use these for adding value to your ribs of beef, and you don't just have to do a 2 rib of beef. We've got bags, 300 by 600 bags, which will take a 4 rib or a 5 rib of beef. We are looking at getting some bigger bags, so if you do need any larger bags than 300 by 600, and you're looking at a minimum order quantity of around about 1,000 bags, so they're not cheap. But if you're in the restaurant industry and you're looking to do large quantities of dry aging, then do get in contact with us, and we'll see what we can do for you. In the meantime, this is going to go into the fridge. We'll come back to this when it's at its target weight, and we'll cook it up. I've taken that 2 rib that we're air drying out of the fridge, and here it is on the bench. We've been drying this since the 14th of October. It's now the 19th, so it's been in for 5 days, and you can see it's started to change colour. Also, if you press it, you can feel the texture's changing. It's becoming firmer. Now, there are some areas here where it's taking a little bit longer to dry. That's perfectly normal. You can see after you pull the initial vacuum, these bags lose the vacuum a little bit. Now that's perfectly normal. Don't worry about that. It's still doing its drying thing. It's just slightly slower in some areas. Let me show you the other side. You can see, because that bag's been sitting flat on the rack, it's got very, very good contact there. You can see the fat's just starting to yellow and dry beautifully. When we cook this, we'll fry this fat up on its edge like that in the pan and get a good colour on it before we roast the joint. So when we weighed this initially, it was 1.767 kilos, or 1,767 grams. I'll turn that around so you can see it better. We calculated a 15% weight loss, and that works out at 1.505 kilos. I'll just zero the scales and we'll see how we're doing for progress on this. And okay, so there we go, 1,683. So we've lost about 75 grams there, and that's brilliant. So we're heading in the right direction. We've still got a little way to go. And yeah, so we've still got about 177 grams to lose here. So I'm estimating probably another 10 days for this, but we'll monitor it after 5 days. We'll pop this straight back in the fridge. What I might do is turn it over and give the other side contact on the rack to speed it along, even up the drying. And this is now ready to go straight back into the fridge, and we'll come back and visit this again in another 5 days. Well, it's been 28 days. This beef has been in the dry aging bag. I've just taken it out and trimmed it up. I want you to come and have a look at this. So you can see here, we finally got down to our target weight. We started at 1,767 grams. And we've reached 1,505 grams. Here's the bag. We've taken the meat out the bag, and obviously because it's been drying for a considerable time, and I did a little trick on this meat as well, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But what we've done basically is, you can see here, we've trimmed off some of the edge fat, some of the dry bits, some of the dried meat. You're always going to get a little bit of trim here which needs to come off. And all you do is you just go around the meat very gently. You don't want to take off too much fat, but just take off any dry edges that you think look a little bit crusty. And you can see the meat's really nice and firm now. It's got a really nice firmness to it. The fat's gone really hard. Obviously that's dried as well. We always take a little bit of that fat off. And you can see you don't get too much wastage when you use a dry aging bag, because it does it very, very gently. Now, let me tell you about the weight loss. I said this has been in for 28 days, and it has. However, this bag had done its job and reduced the weight of this meat down to its target weight after 14 days. But I wanted to dry age this for 28 days, and you may think, well, okay, fair enough. It's dried out after 14 days. How can I then stop it drying out further and still keep this aging, so to speak? So what I do is I keep the meat in the bag and then pop the bag into a standard vacuum bag. And that goes straight into there. We stick that on the vacuum machine, pull a vacuum, and it seals that bag inside a bag that doesn't allow air drying. So once that's on vacuum, it goes back into the fridge. Doesn't need to be on a rack because it's not drying, but it goes back into the fridge, and you can then dry it for a further 28 days. And what does that do? Well, you'll find when meat dries out, it dries from the outside in. So the moisture comes from the centre of the meat, passes through the outside, so you end up getting a dry crust on the outside. So if you were to take it out after 14 days and then trim that meat, you'd find that you would lose more yield because you're taking off a thick layer of crust. By doing what I do and aging it further for another 14 days in a regular vacuum bag, which isn't a dry aging bag, what happens is over that next 2 weeks, the meat has an opportunity to equalise its dry bits to its wet bits. So you'll find a lot of that moisture from the centre that still exists will go towards the outside of the meat, and it'll rehydrate it. So you'll end up with a much more sort of evenly dried piece of meat. So when you come back down to the meat, you'll see that we have trimmed off the bare minimum. So I would probably say I've got no more than about 100 grams of trim here. And you would be, you know, if you took that straight out the drying bag and then trimmed it, you'd probably lose double that, maybe even a fraction more. But this is ready to go. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to cook this on the bone. So we're going to cook it on the bone. We'll pop this into a frying pan first, and we'll sear down all this fat. We'll render that down, and then we'll sear it both sides. And once that's got a nice sear on the outside, we'll temperature probe it into the center here, probably going through here, into the center. And when that's, we'll stick that straight into the oven. And when that's ready, we will then pop that in the oven and cook until we get a temperature of around about 53, 52, 53. Then we'll bring it out, cover it over, and let it rest for a while. And there we go. Right, let's get this pan on. Right, we're not going to put anything in the pan until we've got some fat rendered down from the beef. As soon as that's happened, we'll introduce some garlic and some thyme and rosemary, and then we'll get this all seared off, ready to go into the oven. So we'll stick the oven on 180 on fan so that can preheat. We'll do this now. We'll get that fan 180. So that's preheating. We've got our Le Creuset heating up here, and we're going to get our beef into the pan, and we're going to allow this to sear off. So we're going to do the fat first. We're going to get this fat nicely melted in, get some colour on that. It's nothing worse than insipid, uncooked fat on a piece of meat this good. So while that's doing its thing, I'll get my temperature probe, and I'll show you what we're going to do with this. So when this meat is all seared off, we're going to inject this temperature probe into the centre of the meat. We'll set it for about 52, 53 degrees Celsius, And then as soon as it's reached that temperature, once it's in the oven, we'll take it out. It'll carry on cooking, so that heat is being measured from the center of the meat. So it's going to be a lot hotter on the outside, and that heat will then move through and cook the meat. It should get to about 58 degrees Celsius, by which time it will be absolutely perfect, sort of rare, medium rare. So that's what we're going to do. So back on the meat. I'm going to move that around, so there's some heat coming into this pan now. So you can see that's beginning to melt down. It does take a while. This has been out of the fridge now for about an hour and a half. So it's had a chance to warm up a little bit, but not a great deal. So it does take a little bit of time to do this. But you can see that's beginning to bubble. So when this goes into the oven, once we've sealed off all sides of this, we'll pop it in this pan. So this whole pan will go straight into the oven, so you'll have all that residual heat in the pan working with that meat to cook it. When we bring it out, once it reaches target temperature, we will cover it over with a little bit of foil. Over the top of that, we'll put a tea towel just to preserve some of that heat, and we'll watch that thermometer really carefully. As soon as it reaches target temperature, we'll whip the meat out, we'll cut it off the bone and carve it, and then that'll be ready to go. There we go, just beginning to get a little bit of colour in there. So while that's happening, I'll do some garlic. All I'm going to do with this, I'm just going to flatten this with the knife. Take off the skins. We don't want to pop those in. And we don't want to leave the garlic in there for too long whilst we've got it on the heat, because that will burn the garlic and it will become bitter. So we'll take off any bits of garlic that got a little bit of crud on them. We don't want that going in there. Right. Don't have to do anything much with that. Herbs can go in as they are, and we'll just wait for the right time before that's ready. And you can see I'm just going to stick the extractor fan on here. Here we go. I'm going to get rid of some of those fumes. You can just see that's beginning to render down some of that lovely beef drip in there. Up and get that going. I can feel the heat coming from that pan. That's really quite good. Down on this just a little bit. I want to get a nice even sear on that fat, help it render down even more. You can see that's rendering down really nicely now. And some nice colour on there. We want that a little darker. Just turn the heat down on here just a fraction. The beautiful thing about these pans is that they hold a tremendous amount of heat. So once you've got this nice and warm, that heat is transferred nice and evenly across the base, so that you don't really get any major hot spots in the pan. If you're going to buy or you're looking for a new pan, always go for something really nice and heavy. Get that good quality heavy base, and you'll find that that will last you a lifetime. So, a bit of colour coming on that now. You can see we're rendering that fat down beautifully. This fat is so delicious. it's almost cured. Now you'll notice I haven't seasoned this yet. As soon as this goes and I'm laying it flat, I will season it, and I've got a little bit of salt here which I'm going to use for that. Just a little bit of salt. That's all we need. We can season it with pepper later. You can see now the fat's beginning to change colour, and we're getting a really nice crisp on that. That's looking, oh, careful. There we go. Right. Okay, that's looking really good. In a few seconds we'll be ready to just lay this on its side, and we'll transfer from the hand, and we'll start using a fork or a pair of tongs to pick this up because it's getting quite warm. I always find it's easier using my hand whilst I'm just filling the fat edge on this. Right, there we go. I'm going to lay this down. Goes the garlic, here goes the thyme. Way, come on. Tongs and a meat fork, that's what we need. So we really only want this garlic to flavour the oil, to flavour that lard. As soon as that's done, we'll take it out, because by that time it would go bitter, and we don't want those bitter flavours to be transferred into that meat. So I'm harvesting all this garlic over to one side. We'll take that out now, because we don't want that getting bitter and then getting that bitter flavour in the oil. So I'll just spoon that out onto our board. That would have done its job. I can smell the garlic in the oil. That's amazing. I'll even take the herbs out now, because there's a lot of lard in here, and that would have taken all the flavour out of those herbs. So I'll just put those on top of the meat for now. We're going to turn this in a minute. Put those herbs on top. Now we just want a nice bit of colour to develop on this. Season this side as well. Bit of salt on there. Grab your tea towel. Try basting some of this oil. I keep calling it oil. It's beef dripping. Okay, so this is technically known as dripping, although it is oil, obviously. So look at that lovely colour on that. That's looking stunning. All those flavours are going to be infused into this beef. these herbs off now because I think they've done their bit. And we'll flip this piece of meat over. There we go, I'll just kill that for the minute. Alright, let's see how this is doing. Okay, probably another minute or so on that side. Press it down so we get a really good sear. You can see the colour on that, absolutely beautiful. That Maillard reaction, giving all those really rich, juicy, gorgeous umami flavours in this beef. This is a truly respectful piece of meat, and obviously the way we cook this, we have to treat it with that same level of respect. If you age a piece of meat for that length of time, it's worth taking the time to give it just a little bit of care. So, we'll flip it over, baste it off, and then we'll transfer this into the oven. There we go. Okay, now this is ready to probe. I'll turn the heat off here because we don't need any more heat coming through. Okay, here's our probe. I'm going to set the temperature to 52 degrees Celsius. Okay, so that's set to 52 degrees Celsius. I'm now going to probe this meat at its thickest point, and I want to obviously make sure that that gets right there. And you'll see we're not there yet. That's 17 degrees Celsius, so you can see how cold that is in the centre. It's still getting colder, it's 15 degrees now. Obviously, because this meat's been in the fridge, and you know, even with the temperatures and the heat we've got going on here, it's still going to take quite a while for that temperature to come through. So as soon as that beeps, we're ready to go. So I'm going to stick this in the oven, and this is where I need about 3 pairs of hands. So that's all good. Right, unsticking that. There we go. Go straight in the oven. Close that up there, and we stick that on the side. And we'll come back to that when the buzzer goes off. So you can see the meat's now been in the oven for about 15 minutes. And if we look at the temperature gauge already, you can see we're up to 50 degrees Celsius. So, as soon as that reaches 52, which it will do in a second, we'll whip this out the oven and crack on with it. Okay, it's now beeping at me. We're at 52 degrees internal temperature. We'll turn the oven off. More importantly, we'll get this out. So, make sure that that cable doesn't get snagged up. Right. So I'm going to set this for 59 degrees. Actually, I'm going to set it for 58 degrees Celsius. It's now at 55 already. I'm going to leave it here don't want the top to dry out, so we'll just put some foil on that. We'll stick a tea towel on top of that, just to give it a little bit of insulation, and we'll come back to that when the alarm goes off and it reaches target temperature. We'll whip it out of the pan, we'll carve it up. Okay, the meat has reached its target temperature. I'm now going to take it out of the pan and we're going to carve it up. So I've got it on this rack. I'm going to move the rack forward a bit, and then the meat can come out straight onto my carving rack here. There we go. So this will continue to carry on warming through. So we are still at 59 degrees now. So that's a perfect temperature for a nice medium rare. So I'm going to cut into this now. So if you want to come in nice and close, more in the hot pan there. So there you go. Look at that. Beautifully succulent, lovely, medium rare ribeye. Absolutely delicious. Let me try a little bit of that. So it's got that lovely umami flavour on the outside. It's beautifully soft, lovely intense flavour of that wonderful steak. And I would say if anyone's going to be cooking steak, this is the way to do it. You know, you've got a nice expensive cut of meat here, just taking off that extra bit of moisture by air drying it for 14 days and then allowing it to equalise for another 14 days in the fridge. You get that 28-day age. It doesn't dry out completely. You have to trim a little bit off the outside to give you the final sort of meat that you want before you actually stick it in the pan. But there we go. That's ready to eat and it tastes delicious.